Hello, good evening, all of you. Hi, Adit. How are you?
Hi, Teja. Doing very well. Good evening to
Okay,
all.
that's good. Good evening to all of you. First of all, again, want to. It's a pleasure to meet some of you again from the last week, right? So this is a second in the series of interactions that we are bringing in front of you, largely to. I mean, we all know ASS, right? But actually, we wanted to give you a sneak peek into what goes on behind ASS to make it into the event that it is, right? So we've curated these sessions with some of the leaders who's been working on making ASS happen. Last week, we had a privilege of Vinayak joining us, and today, the man behind everything that you see in ASS, Adit, he's responsible for entire, the whole agenda curation and speaker identification, engaging with all the ecosystems, right? So this week, I mean, we wanted to bring you a perspective on what actually goes into curating such an diverse and rich and jam-packed agenda in ASS, right? So I wonder actually how Aditya does it, but let's hear it from the horse's mouth, and I look forward to having what good 15-20 minutes of interaction with him to understand not just the why of ASS, but actually how as well, right? So we'll broadly cover different agenda, what is in store for all of us, and what discussions that one should not miss, and all that, right? So with that, I think a very warm welcome to you, Adit. Why don't you start with saying what ASS means for you, right? So you've been at this for many years, right? So why don't you start by telling all of us, ki, what does ASS mean for you, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Teja, for that generous introduction. And
Mm,
we're talking to all of you for those of you listening to us, this evening. So as Teja mentioned, in his initial remarks, the idea or the intent of today's session is just to bring forth the thinking
mm,
that goes behind, building the AISS. Certainly more than an event, more than a conference for us. It's essentially a culmination of what keeps on transpiring throughout the year in the field of cyber, in the field of data, in the field of privacy, but going way beyond as well, right?
mm,
It's not just a culmination of what has been transpiring, but also it's a reflection of what
mm,
are the key triggers, which are there in the ecosystem. And DSCI as an industry body, and more importantly, as a think tank, it's incumbent upon us to, be proactively tracking those triggers and responding to triggers, right?
mm,
So, in my opinion, if I were to, in a very short encapsulate, tell you what ACE is for me, ACE is something which is an all-consuming affair for us as a team. That is what how I perceive it. But it's also, uh, I think it's the perfect platform that offers, ample opportunities, abundant opportunities, and
mm.
it systematically brings together the entire ecosystem in a very meaningful and structured fashion. That's how I would put it.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, when I mean to if I have to give my own perspective, right? When someone looks at the entire length and breadth of ASS and the agenda that we cover, right? I think there's something in ASS for every one of us, right? No matter how small, how big, at what level, at what experience you have. I think there's something in there for all of us, right? And most of the agenda that we've curated is done in such a way that essentially is a lot more. It's not just limited to one person's perspective or one company's perspective. It's quite broad and forward looking, right? So, Adit, if I have to ask this to you, right? How do we actually do it, right? What is actually the core design philosophy behind ASS 2025? I have to ask you.
Absolutely. So I think Teja, for us, preparations for ASS are more like an ongoing activity, right?
Mm,
Throughout the year, we keep on doing multiple things, and this is one important aspect which I think I should, very prominently mention. You talked about different stakeholders. So
mm,
across the board, whether we are talking about industry, whether we are talking about government, education, academia, innovation fraternity, investment fraternity, and whatnot. Defense. Let me not forget the defense and the law enforcement. So DSCI, as you're all aware, we execute multiple charters, and
mm,
those are all aimed at furthering the cybersecurity and data protection agenda in the country. So
mm,
throughout the year, we keep on we keep a close track of what is
mm,
transpiring in the ecosystem, and
mm,
this is one part of it. The other part of the story is to be able to anticipate, to be able to
mm,
foresee, what
mm,
what the ecosystem might be requiring in times to come. So
mm,
certainly we have to be forward looking enough. We have to be forthcoming enough, and being
mm,
able to anticipate what are the kind of challenges which the ecosystem should get
mm,
geared up for. Right, so I
mm,
would put it at at a very high level. I'm sure even not getting into the nitty gritties of how we do it, but the basic spirit of how we do it is we combine these two things throughout the year.
mm,
We keep on tracking what's happening,
mm,
and we are also
mm,
at the same time in collaboration and in conjunction, I would say, with the
mm,
entire ecosystem, be it the industry, government, or academia. We
mm,
keep on contemplating. Okay, this is
mm,
what the industry or the ecosystem actually needs, and a
mm.
lot of it is what is actually manifested in the ASS agenda. Hope I'm making
Okay.
sense.
Yeah, of course, of course. And I mean, I want to double click on what you just mentioned, right? We've been tracking. I mean, one beautiful message that is coming out of this discussion and also the discussion with Vinayak is it's not an event, right? It's a culmination of everything that is happening in the cyber ecosystem over the last 1 year, right? So one thing, Adit, I mean, we've seen so much that happened in the last 1 year, right? For example, I mean, people talk about AI, but we also see a lot of thing in OT security. We also see a lot of things in quantum and a lot of developments in all the other domains, right? So, if I have to ask you, what are these broader technology shifts that we have been seeing, and how are we condensing all of those into an agenda that fits for 3 days, right? So if I have to ask you, what are these broader technology shifts that we are focusing this year, and how are we balancing it all out with technology, with transformation, with threats, and everything ever evolving technology landscape? How are we doing all of that in 3 days?
Absolutely. So I think for those who have been closely tracking what we as DSCI do,
Mm,
I think it would be very safe statement to make that we have gone way beyond cyber and privacy. Right. I think
mm,
that's what
mm,
my understanding is. That now we have really brought emerging technology into our fold, meaning
right.
that emerging technologies which play a crucial role across the sectors. Right. So
Mm,
for us, there are multiple ways and multiple viewpoints, in fact, I would say,
mm,
as to how we, when we actually do, the basic ideation for ASS, we, one looking at the sectors, how sectors
mm,
have been evolving, right? The
mm,
kind of digitization which is happening across the sectors, right? Because
mhm,
it's not going to be the same. It certainly
mm,
varies from sector to sector. The
mm,
maturity is going to vary, but and at
mm,
the same time, how sectors have been grappling with the kind
mm,
of threats or the multi-attack, attacks
mm,
happening from multiple fronts. Right. So
mm,
one of the important considerations or the technology shifts that you were talking about, Teja, is of course, by virtue of adoption of those emerging technologies, by
mm,
virtue of the
mm,
use cases that might be, evolving or cropping up in
mm,
different sectors at different points in time. So
mm,
we are, paying heed to those use cases and
mm,
how the industry would actually need to respond.
mm,
Or let me put it in a slightly different way, what the industry would need to be equipped with, right, in
mm,
order to be able to satisfactorily answer all those problem statements, that are confronting them.
mm,
Right. So one of the important trends, in addition to this, is that while a lot of conventional sectors have been talking about digitization and they have also been solving some of the advanced challenges in cyber, some of the
mm,
sectors are still trying to figure out what would be the best way to kind of undertake this journey in cyber. So that is one important consideration for us, the technology trends. And of course, let's not forget about the fact that how cyber as a subject, has
mm,
transitioned from being like an operational thing to becoming, extremely strategic in nature,
mm,
right?
mm,
Because of the kind of implications which are being experienced at all levels of organizations. Gone were
mm,
the days when we were really concerned about what's going to happen to the security teams and the CISOs, etc. We also
mm,
now need to be equally, if not more, concerned about how the boards are looking at cyber. How
mm,
and of course, even given that DSCI engages very very closely on the policy matters, and
mm,
how regulations are getting formulated in close
mm,
conjunction with different regulatory entities.
mm,
So for
mm,
us, it's also important to see what are the kind of shifts which are happening at that level. How
mm,
regulators are trying to kind of strike a balance,
mm,
coming out with frameworks and guidelines and directions, which
mm,
on one hand do kind of lend a cybersecurity cover to the sector, but at the same time not stifling the innovation. Right. So
mm,
striking that perfect balance is how I would put it. So majorly this, but again, I haven't really gotten into the thick of things. Say, for example, when we're talking about the operational aspects of security, right? With the advent of AI, with the advent of Gen AI, and that too in
mm,
multiple shapes and forms. What are the
mm,
kind of security implications which organizations now have to
mm,
deal with, right?
mm.
And do they have pragmatic strategies in place in order to be able to
Right.
counter those
Perf-
security challenges which these emerging techs have cropped up? So I think broadly speaking, these are some of the underlying aspects which form or which play a crucial role in the foundation of the agenda building exercise of AISS.
right. We I mean, my personal take is from last year to this year, right? Last year we were trying to, essentially understand, and to some degree see how actually AI can help and impact cybersecurity. I think this year, as you rightly said, Adit, I think that evolution is certainly something that we see, right? I think the kind of, just 2, 3, I think 5 days before, I just read an article from Anthropic, right? So they kind of possibly an APT or a state sponsored a nation threat actor using such a agentic capability to not just launch but actually succeed in a lot of these attacks, very high profile attacks. It's just it's mind blowing. It's a good learning for me, and I'm very glad that we are covering some of those aspects, right? In our nation. But I'm so sorry, Adit, but I'm gonna put you on spot.
Yeah.
A lot of a lot of times, one critical feedback that I get in ASS is that people always tell that, look, you've made such a good agenda. It's really impossible for us to attend all these panels together, right? If I have to ask you, now you've made this most of this agenda yourself, working with Nayak and others, right? But if I have to ask you, Adit, what are those three sessions that you should say that a security practitioner should not miss? What would those be?
Really tough to answer that because I think the way we construct the 3 days, right? And
Right.
see, we take utmost precaution because we do understand that people at the end of the day have to balance it out. So
Mm,
making sure that the 3 days are evenly balanced in terms of the
mm,
coverage. So if I were to
mm,
talk about the day one, I know that day
mm,
one is essentially about masterclasses. But then again, given that now we have the act in full force, the DPDP
mm,
Act, right, backed by
mm,
the rules
mm.
and everything.
Yeah.
So we have made
Yeah.
sure that
Mm,
every day has some sort of a concrete flavor in terms of the operationalization of privacy, because
mm,
organizations are going to want to have those guidance or hand holding if they were to
mm,
figure out how they can go about implementing privacy at their respective enterprises. So this is
mm,
one important theme, and of course, I'm pretty sure that most of you who are attending ASS or who are about to register, they would be giving the entire agenda very detailed study, and that's as being part of the agenda team, that would be my earnest exhortation to all the people that do look at the agenda very very carefully. I know some
mm,
sort of running from pillar to post is inevitable because you have to kind of you do justice. So the best
mm,
strategy that I feel is divide and conquer, right? Because the way we have constructed the agenda, it is also focused or it is also directed towards
mm,
various teams that are operating within the security functions, various divisions or various specializations. For example, certain teams talking only about from a governance perspective, certain teams
mm,
only talking about from a security operations perspective,
mm,
certain teams only looking at privacy operationalization and privacy readiness perspective, but at
mm,
the same time not losing sight of some of the pressing aspects which the hands-on guys have to kind of uh, take care of, whether it is
mm,
incident response or whether it is, okay, if you are hit by a ransomware, what exactly you should be doing about, how should we
mm,
how would you go about handling that particular crisis, right? So it's really hard to answer that question, Teja, to name top things. But the way I would put it is, on all 3 days, we have enough and more, substantial, ground to cover, and
mm.
I would put it as unmissable for all 3 days.
Okay. I mean, for people who don't know Adit, I think this is typical Adit. I was not expecting anything less. Such a nice diplomatic answer. So that's good, Adit. So then again, I mean, uh, one thing I think I must ask you, right, specifically is the entire OT security agenda, right? I mean, I remember about a couple of days before we were thinking, "Okay, chalo, theek hai, OT, what we should do in OT, right?" And then we've experimented, and then we had such a nice room full of people just, I mean, arguing with each other. Ki, I want to be inside the room. There's no chairs and whatnot, right? I think this year, if I look at OT security agenda, right, it looks to be having the biggest spotlight ever in ASS. It's evolved from a half-day agenda to a one-day agenda. Now it's a full 2 days agenda, right? So, what is it that we saw in OT, right? And in
Right.
terms of threats, in terms of landscape, that convinced you that this deserves an entire 2 days of focused effort, if I may ask you.
No, absolutely. So, in the interest of full disclosure, there is a team which dedicatedly, works on OT. Bhupesh,
Mm-hmm.
leads that team. So, I think, Teja, when we introduced this OT, sub summit as a concept, I think the response that we got was simply, overwhelming, right? And we were really astounded by the fact, okay, this is, this clearly and very abundantly it makes clear to us that what are the kind of guidance which the industry is looking from these kind of conversations, because we know that when we are talking about public sector, when we are talking about organizations which are in charge of operating the critical information infrastructure, so there is a strong realization across the ecosystem that certain concerted measures and certain concerted strategies need to be formulated when it comes to your OT security, right? Whether it's in terms of setting up an OT SOC, whether it's in terms of making sure that your IT and the OTs talk to each other, there is adequate convergence, and at the same time making sure that you have a workforce in OT which is separate from the IT security workforce and is equipped well enough to take to tackle on the the kind of vulnerabilities which OT systems are literally being exposed to, right? So, and this is also by virtue of DCI's interaction with so many of its members, which operate in the CIS space, right? Which prompted us to literally make this from a 1 day affair to a 2 day affair, right? And even when we have made it into a 2 day affair, we are really finding it difficult to cater to the entire spectrum of OT. So that's how crazy things are. The agenda is expanding very, very rapidly, and OT is just one aspect, right? Same goes, I think, for all the sub summits or all the tracks that we've introduced over the years.
Okay, that's fantastic to know, Adit. I think uh, it's such it's at a cusp of OT is at a cusp of essentially a breakthrough, right? And not just the understanding about OT is evolving quite rapidly, and the kind of innovation that we are seeing globally from Israel, from India, from US, it's phenomenal. So I'm very glad that essentially we have an entire 2 day agenda, and we not just so this is the core of ASS is not just technology, right? Essentially, the entire nuanced understanding about how each of this is playing an impact into everything else, right? From security to strategy to whatnot, right? To careers and what else. I think that is in a nutshell what is, right? So it's not just about talking about one specific agenda, but entire foundation of all the things together coming under one umbrella. That's AFS for all of us. I think, I mean, switching gears, Adit, so quantum again,
Yeah.
we've all seen the quantum and the evolution, and it's no longer a buzzword, right? So the impact is real. The people are already starting to think about investing in quantum resiliency in a big way, and whatnot, right? So. what is that story that we are trying to say with the quantum sub summit that we quantum edge summit that we have in ASS, and why should I mean what's in store for people who are coming for this quantum edge sub summit? For them, what's in for them to come and attend maybe a one full day agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. Remind me to ask the same question right back at you. But yeah, let me take the first crack at it. So I think quantum, Teja, because if you look at organizations which are trying to figure out what will
Mm,
happen, once quantum actually strikes, right? A
mm,
lot of it, the certainly the timelines have incredibly shrunk from a
mm,
quantum perspective. No doubt, no two ways about it.
mhm,
People, invest spending a lot of time in doing those assessments. Post quantum, what exactly are the systems robust enough? Do we need to make certain migrations? Do we need to make those decisions where our systems do not really crumble by the quantum juggernaut? So I think all those aspects in terms of building your capacities, right? Even when it comes to understanding the nuances of quantum, which is incredibly complex, right? And you know this better than me in terms of the kind of preparations or the hand holding which the industry would be requiring, right? If they
mhm,
were to successfully kind of, I would say, survive quantum, right? And
mm,
on one is surviving quantum and other is leveraging quantum, right? For so many
mm.
different aspects, right? So I
Right.
think just focusing on both these dimensions is critical. And that's what
Mm,
I think when you introduced this quantum sub summit last time around, and you saw the response, right? And then thanks to you that we have been able to cater to different sectors. I still remember that at the FinSec we did talk about quantum from a financial perspective, but at
mm,
ASS we do have the luxury of catering to all the sectors that
mm,
operate in India, right? So and that's precisely what the quantum sub summit which is a day long affair that we have introduced this time around. And I'm absolutely sure that people would be leaving with a lot more queries than they would have. They would be getting a lot more than what they bargained for. But at the same time, I think this would be a positive indicator, right? Given that the industry is trying to understand the ramifications of quantum for their systems,
mm.
right, and how they can be better prepared for it.
Okay. I think, yeah, so I mean, yeah, I've been given an opportunity to curate an agenda for quantum, right? So essentially, uh, the thought process specifically that went into quantum is not just quantum is so much than computing and security, right? So essentially, but at the same time, we don't want to give just the GAN, right? So essentially,
Yeah.
what we were able to do, I think, and the kind of speaker confirmations that we got, the kind of agenda that we were able to pull, it's a phenomenal thing, right? So we certainly will start. I mean, someone from NIST, very senior person from NIST, has agreed to come to briefly tell about the entire PQC journey that NIST has gone through, the entire 10 years of experience. This person more or less has driven it from the very beginning. So he's coming and then and talking about this PQC perspective. But then we also have actual quantum algorithms and how you are actually getting those implemented. We have a track on resiliency, but also more importantly, we are able to bring together how quantum is actually being used today in finance. Right, I think just a couple of weeks before, we all saw that news key. One company has leveraged a quantum computer from IBM and then are able to bring maybe 30% of more efficiency in their trades, right? So, how is that actually shaping up is something that we are able to bring in our agenda in quantum. So, and we consciously wanted to put it on day one of the agenda of the ASS so that, it's people have opportunity and no one will complain to me, at least, Siki Teja, why did you put quantum with respect to against OT, and I don't want to be in two places. I'm not quantum entangled, right? People will say this. So, इसलिए we thought कि चलो quantum should be on day one, and that's a good agenda. I hope to see some of you there, right? But
Absolutely.
uh, so couple of quick things, Aditya, I want to ask you, right? Pulse again has been shaping up quite well, right? Do you think all these incidents that happened in the last 1 year, right? Be it let's say this hospital attacks in Delhi, or this Anthropic style attack, right? Do you think all of these will be broken down in Pulse?
So I think, Teja, one is that Pulse is our attempt, to
Mm,
understand the overall shifts which are happening in the entire workforce landscape, right?
mm,
Because, closely tracking and monitoring where the exact demand and the supply
mm,
of cybersecurity skills flows, right? That is
mm,
one of the important charters that we make
mm,
sure that we drive, and that too in close conjunction with government and industry.
mm,
So I think
mm,
Pulse, on one hand, would certainly try to analyze and examine, of course, with the help of subject
mm,
matter experts that we are trying to get from all across the country, and not just country, beyond as well. Right, so
mm,
Pulse would certainly help us dissect those important the important trends and shifts in workforce, and of course, it cannot be divorced from the emerging technologies. So whether it is
mm,
the generative AI, the real impact it would be having
mm,
on ground in terms of the kind of the new job roles that might emerge, and some of
mm,
the old job roles that might become redundant, right?
mm,
And there is a growing realization in the ecosystem that certain job roles will metamorphose, right, in
mm,
some way or another. So that is the reality, which Pulses, will try to bring forth. And of course, at the same time, let's not forget that we also have a generation of professionals to be prepared. Who
mm,
can becomes tomorrow's cybersecurity technology leaders. So how do you
mm,
make it happen? And you can't really expect the academia to take all the workload on themselves. They need to be handled. They need to work. They need to work in tandem with the industry, right? Because as long as there is a huge disconnect between the two, I think the outcomes that they might be looking for,
mm,
because that is a fact of the matter, that the old approach to skilling, the
mm,
old approach to competency building and workforce development, that may not hold water anymore, right? I think that is the truth that we all need to kind of step up and face. So Pulse is all about this.
mm. Okay. And do you think all the recent, I mean, I'm fairly sure now that DPDP will certainly be discussed, right? So, what other things that what are, let's say, what are the five things that on a broader level that will get discussed at a intimate detail? What are those sessions that will more or less define the technical direction of ASS 2025, if I may ask you?
Right, absolutely. So I think, if I only talk about the kind of parallel track conversations that we are hosting. So one, I
Mm,
already talked about how do you actually become ransomware ready, right? So
mm,
that
mm,
is one important conversation which I would really like people to focus on.
mm,
Then, in addition to tracks, we are doing so many focused conversations and focused
mm,
deliberations.
mm,
So,
mm,
for
mm.
example, one important deliberation that comes to my mind is where we're talking about AI-powered threat intelligence, right? Where
Okay.
we are trying to gather, the SOC communities, the IR communities, and threat intelligence
Mm,
communities, from across the different verticals of industries and beyond,
mm,
to see how AI-powered threat hunting could actually be, actioned, right?
mm,
In addition, then let's say from a privacy and a policy perspective, it's
mm.
extremely important to understand how the policy makers or the regulators at the top, how they are thinking about it, and what are the kind of technology trends that they are picking up, and
Mm,
how do you make sense of the two when there's an intersection between the two. What are the kind of interventions which might be required at an ecosystem level, right? So
mm,
privacy policy track is certainly another thing. We already did touch upon the sub summits, of course.
mm,
Since I mentioned at the beginning, that we make it sure that we are looking at some of those unconventional sectors, and some of the
mm,
sectors which are just picking up in cyber and
mm,
privacy. So some
mm,
of the sectors like chemicals, some of the sectors like healthcare. In fact, we
mm,
do have a healthcare sub summit as well on day one.
mm, mm,
We are looking at the payments, cohort, in the BFSI space. So some of these important gatherings, which will bring together, the leadership in
mm,
these organizations, and it's not just about convening them once. This is more
mm,
like a kickstart of what is to become like a sustained effort. Because as I mentioned, ASS is certainly, it is a continuous journey for us, Teja.
mm, mm,
Because as I mentioned, it's a reflection of what all
mm,
DSA does, what are the key triggers which are out there in the ecosystem. It's a good mix of that, I would say. Right.
mm.
So
Okay.
for us, it's not just really a one time thing.
Okay. Okay. Fantastic. So, I mean, towards we are at the fag end of the session, right? Adit, I mean, I two very quick questions for you, if I may request that you be keep them short as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, most of us would have an ADHD, right? So if we have to condense everything that you said in the last 30 minutes and tell me what is that one liner response for anyone who asks, let's say practitioners to architects to threat intel folks to OT engineers to quantum folks, key what is that one liner reason that they should not miss ASS? If you can condense all our conversation in the last 30 minutes into this one liner, that would be phenomenal.
Absolutely. So I think two things, Teja, here, because I think in terms of the gamut that we cover, so we try
Hmm.
to cover maximum ground.
Hmm.
We try not to leave out anything which is pertinent and critical to the industry and which is not being discussed. This is one. And secondly, in terms of the stakeholders, the subject matter experts, the decision makers, and the key technology minds of the country, which from a cyber standpoint, from a privacy standpoint, or even from an emerging tech standpoint, those who can actually help us capture, or do what we call it the future casting, right? So to be able to, as accurately as possible predict what is going to happen in the ecosystem in, let's say, 5 years from now, or I really don't want to get into the timeline game. But for these two reasons, I think ASS really, offers a very, I would say, pertinent and apt platform. So certainly, I would, again, for those who are trying to make that call as to why they should be attending ASS, I think just go through the agenda and everything would become amply clear to you.
Okay, okay, that's very well said, Adit. So one quick thing, right? Last week, I asked Vinayaki what is that one thing that one piece of advice that you want to give for these folks, and then I think we both conversed on the fact that people should wear the sports shoes, not the formal shoes, right? So what would be that one piece of advice that you would give, unconventional piece of advice that you would give for to someone who's planning to come to ASS? With that, I think we'll close the discussion.
No, absolutely. So I think may not be unconventional as you mentioned, Teja, but I think for us, ASS is something that as an experience, we really expect all of you, to make the most of it, but at the same time, make sure that you are enjoying, you are connecting with people. That's what the crux of the matter is. And wherever possible, try not to miss out on those critical deliberations. So I think it all comes down to your wisdom in terms of figuring out what are those important deliberations which are happening and where, right? It would involve a bit of a groundwork, but I think it's worth your while.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. That's such an interesting take. Thanks, Adit. And again, I think for all the audience, I hope you've got to understand what actually goes into making such an rich and diverse and such a deep agenda that covers entire length and breadth of what's happened in the last year across the ecosystem, what's happened everywhere, right? With that, essentially, I want to take a minute to thank you for your patient time listening to us speaking candidly over the last 30 minutes. Um, um, I I mean, we'll be seeing you next week, right? Essentially, next week I think we'll be largely covering on the OT security. I think Adit beautifully mentioned what actually our larger thought process into OT and how we saw that evolving in the last 2 years. But specifically, we specifically wanted to double click on what actually is happening in the OT security summit. So we'll bring Bhupesh to tell us all about OT, and then that's happening next week. So I look forward to seeing you there. And also, please do go to TSA's website and then register for ASS. We have such a phenomenal conference coming up in the next 15 odd days, and it's not to be missed, right? So essentially, if you can join us, do join us on third, fourth, and 5th of December. The tickets and everything, all the information that we've just discussed till now is available on ASS website. And of all, I want to thank Adit for such a candid discussion over the last 30 minutes. Thank you, Adit, and I look forward
Thank
to
you, Teja.
seeing all of you in the next 15 days at ASS. Thank you.
Thank you.